Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those of you who are joining us from across the world today. We are delighted to have with us Kwame Christian, Director of the American Negotiation Institute, a lawyer at Carlisle, Patchen, and Murphy, and the host of the world's most popular negotiation podcast, Negotiate Anything. Downloaded more than 1.5 million times, Negotiate Anything has a dedicated and growing global audience, and now has listeners in 181 countries, I think. His book, Finding Confidence in Conflict: How to Negotiate Anything and Live Your Best Life, is an Amazon bestseller. Kwame is also a negotiation and conflict resolution professor at the Ohio State University's Moritz College of Law. He's also a professor in Otterbein University's MBA Pro. If you just got married, if you're a parent or to a teenager, if you're looking to for a new raise or a promotion, or you simply want to stop your spouse from eating all your cinnamon toast crunch cereal, you need to listen to what Kwame has to say today. Welcome to Pandemic Punditry, Kwame.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. So, to kick things off, tell me how a kid who grew up in this very diverse high school in Tiffin, Ohio, end up as a global authority on negotiation.
With hard work, I would say, and consistency, really. And it's really interesting because what I've recognized now is when we think about the world and how connected we are online, your personal brand is more important now than ever before. And we have all of these different means to which we can reach different people. And so what I did was I just focused on one narrow pathway for the beginning, which was the podcast, and then that naturally led to other opportunities. And so it took some time, but we made it. And I think it's just creating a good strategy, executing, and then staying disciplined and keeping on the path. That's what got me here.
Oh, it's great to hear. No, I know that you sort of tell us that you're a sort of a people pleaser person, and that because of your I think the joke was that you grew up in a almost all white sort of town called Tiffin, Ohio, right? So you were naturally inclined to sort of not rock the boat too much. And I'm also a recovering people pleasing person. So, what advice do you give people who are people pleasers when it comes to negotiation?
Well, I think what we have to do is recognize that with people pleasing, we are motivated in large part by fear. So, what is the fear? The fear is failure. We're afraid of losing the relationship. We're afraid of people getting mad at us, right?
Right.
And so the thing is, fear is a great motivator, and I don't suggest that we get rid of that. I can't just say, "Hey, stop
Yeah.
being afraid." That's not helpful. That's not how people work. But what I'm telling people is that you have to consider what you're afraid of. And so, some simple suggestion is shift your focus from the fear of failure to the fear of regret.
Fear
Fear
of
of
regret.
failure versus fear of regret. So, if you look back 10 years, 20 years from now, and you look back on this moment, what will you regret the most? And most of the time, it's not standing up for yourself, because people pleaser, when they look back on what they've done, they don't feel a lot of self-respect because they say there's something that I wanted and I didn't advocate for myself. And so when you shift to that focus, it makes it a lot easier to determine what the right answer is in that moment.
Okay. So moving from fear to regret.
Exactly.
What would you regret if you didn't confront, if you didn't sort of, put yourself in a uncomfortable position to get at something that you think you deserve? Kartika?
Yeah. Hi, Corey. Thanks for joining us today. So I'm actually the opposite personality of Lavi. I'm not a people pleaser like at all. More like a bull in the china shop type approach, right? So how can I kind of cultivate, or people like me cultivate a more compassionate, less kind of confrontational approach to negotiation?
Well, I think what we have to do is utilize a little bit of humility and patience. And so, with humility, what we're doing is recognizing that we have to recognize that we don't know all the answers. We might potentially be wrong. And I'm a competitive person, and so I always want to try to win. And so what I've learned is that if I turn it into a game for myself, then I can focus on something else. And so I say, oh, okay. I bet there's something in this conversation that I don't know. I bet I can learn something through this conversation. And so, even in those situations where I'm not in people pleasing mode and I just want to persuade, because remember, I'm a lawyer, I still represent my clients, right? And so, I want to be really aggressive and represent my clients and negotiate hard. I say to myself, let's slow down, because that's not the best strategic approach. Negotiation is an information game. The more I know, the better I'm going to be during the negotiation. So I say, all right, I'm going to make my goal to follow the 70-30 rule, where I listen for 70% of the time and only speak 30% of the time. So it forces me to be more curious. It forces me to slow down. And when I slow down, it's one of those weird dichotomies where really you're slowing down to in fact go faster, because when you try to go fast and push through it and use the bull in the china shop approach, what ends up happening is that we create unnecessary resistance, because what people will do is like, wait, you're pressuring me, slow it down, and they'll slow things down and stand in your way. And so I think just slowing it down, being a little bit more humble and curious through the process would help you in your negotiations.
Great advice.
Okay, thanks, Kwame. So I do have a follow-up question, because you kept speaking, I think, in one of your TED Talks about how, the brain hasn't kept up with the whole evolution, and, how we're kind of behind in that sense, right? And that you spoke a little bit about the fight, flight, and freeze responses, which, Daniel Goleman calls the amygdala hijack, right? So in those kind of situations, how can we rewrite and reprogram our animal instincts to sort of become a successful negotiator?
It's really tough. And so I want to make it clear, this isn't easy. And so what I tell people is that when you're a good negotiator, when you're good at resolving conflict, you have a series of unnatural responses for these situations. So think about it. So if somebody is being aggressive and disrespectful for you, the natural human response isn't to slow down and ask questions and be respectful and compassionate. That's not a normal human thing to do. And so we have to learn to override that. And so really, what we need to do is we need to create habits of engaging, and habits of engaging in a meaningful way. And so what I tell people is that every single interaction we have is a practice opportunity. So I'm married, I have a son, a 5-year-old, and so I look at every single interaction, whether it's with my family, my friends, as a negotiation practice session. This is an opportunity to practice my skills, because think about it, I'm a Caribbean American. I know how my Caribbean family was when it came to discipline and authority. There was no negotiation. There was do what I say and do it faster, right? But I say, listen, okay, so I'm going to take this as an opportunity to teach Kai effective communication skills, and as an opportunity for me to practice my framework too. I'm going to see if I can make him make the right decision. I know I have the power and authority to force him to do it, but I want him to come to that conclusion himself. And so when I do this every day in all of my interactions, it makes it so much easier to do it in the heat of the battle when I'm in a really high level negotiation.
I think you bring up a very interesting point, which I think people don't realize. So I think people wait for that big deal to come, or that tough situation when they have to sort of, okay, now I'm going to learn how to negotiate, and sort of read up and watch a couple of YouTube videos and go there, right? I mean, so from what you're saying is that you got to make this almost second nature, right? You practice makes perfect, just like most everything in life. So what you're saying is, hey, even the smallest opportunities that you have, whether it's with your 5-year-old or with your wife or your friends, practice this negotiation. And I think you use the term compassionate curiosity to sort of as a tool, so that you put that into practice more often than not, so that when you do have the opportunity to negotiate on the big deal or the promotion or whatever else is seriously going to impact your future or your life, you're ready. I mean, at least you've got the basic skills down. So I think that's a very, really good point that you made.
Yeah.
Switching through, I'm just wondering, I think, something that I always sort of, wonder about, living in different parts of the world. Kwame, do you believe that there are sort of significant nuances and or differences when you add things like, race and gender and sexual orientation, national origin, culture, all the other things into this negotiation mix, right? So do you need to make allowances for those things when you are negotiating?
100%. 100%, and it needs to be factored into your negotiation preparation. I'm anybody who listens to the podcast or read my book, you know that I'm all about preparation, and so I have a gift for your audience if they're interested. If they go to our website, AmericanNegotiationInstitute.com/guide, they can get access to all of our free negotiation guides, from how to have a business negotiation and prepare strategically for that, to conflict resolution, to how to have difficult conversations about race and politics and salary negotiation. It's a ridiculous amount of free guides, because what we need to do is we need to recognize that the core psychology at play is more or less the same from different cultures and everything like that. However, the culture, the circumstances, the situations, the traditions that are at play, those are the things that are going to color the specific nuances of the interaction. And there's so many of these that it's really easy to forget. So preparing systematically is going to be very important. So what you want to do is you want to have a strategy based on curiosity, asking open-ended questions and listening effectively, but also at the same time recognizing the unique challenges, the unique barriers that are presented by the specific situation.
Excellent, and thank you for that guides for our listeners. I'm sure there's a lot of interest on your conversation with us today. So I'm sure a lot of people will avail themselves of that generous offer. Karthika?
Thanks, Larry. So, Kwame, with this whole new norm of working from home, right? How has the workplace conflict resolution and negotiation changed? And what tips and techniques do you have for many of us who are sort of struggling with working from home and trying to manage our colleagues who are like in different parts of the world and in the city?
Yeah, this is tough, and it's a problem that's not going to go away. I think a lot of businesses have recognized that they can still function at a decent level when people are remote. So we're going to see more and more of this going into the future. So we have to understand the challenge. The biggest challenge, just to put it simply, is context, right? So we don't have the body language that we would typically see, especially when somebody's in person. When we're talking about email communication, now we have even less context. We don't have tone or anything like that. And what we often find is that in the absence of context, people often assume the worst, which is really, really challenging. And so what we have to do in these situations is think strategically. We have to ask ourselves, what is the platform that serves my interests the best in this situation? And remember, the name of the podcast is Negotiate Anything, because I think we can and should negotiate everything, right? A lot of times we don't take the time to think about the fact that the platform that we use is negotiable. It's usually the first person who says, "Oh, let's hop on a call." People are like, "I guess we're doing a call then. Let's do a Zoom call, video chat. I guess we're doing a Zoom chat." So what I would suggest that your listeners do is think strategically about the what you want to accomplish in this conversation, how emotional it is, how serious it is. Is this just a quick check-in? Then maybe a call might work. Is there a lot of emotionality? Then we want to see video so they can hear your tone and see your body language, so you can communicate the right message the right way. And so I think we need to be proactive about being the person who leads the dance when it comes to determining which platform is utilized at what time.
Yeah, yeah. It's a very interesting point. I think I read recently that there's an interesting statistic that a lot of people who get on Zoom calls, most of the men turn their cameras on, and women tend not to, for whatever reason, right? So, the men don't care, I guess, they're not shaven or not dressed properly. Whatever the reason is, women tend not to turn the cameras on. And this is a fact. I think it's like a 70% difference. It's a significant number. And so, I mean, you're making two very clear points I want to make sure our listeners get. One is that a successful negotiation can't happen without very good preparation, right? I mean, you got to do your research, you got to do your background. You can't just sort of come into this call. And the second thing is, I think you highlight the value of communicating effectively. And this is where, having a camera on in a Zoom call allows people to see, communicate. You're not only communicating with your words, but your body language and your facial expressions and everything else. So if women do tend to turn the camera off for other reasons, I mean, for whatever they are automatically putting themselves at I assume, a point where they are less empowered to negotiate effectively, because they've turned the camera off. And
Exactly.
I think that's something that they should try to avoid doing.
Yeah,
Would you
I think you're
advise?
right, and it plays a strategic role. It impedes the level of connection that you can have with the other person. And remember, when in the absence of actual hard facts and evidence, people assume the worst. And so they're going to
I know
assume
I
that
do.
they exactly, they're going to assume that you're disengaged, you don't care, or something, whatever bad thing is, you're losing an opportunity to control the narrative. And if you're not in control of the narrative, then somebody's going to put a narrative on you, and oftentimes it's not the best for you.
So that brings to this sort of interesting thing. So as a negotiator, and you're an expert at this, do you need to sort of um, take into account the archetype of the person you're negotiating with? For example, are they sort of have they got an analyst mentality? Are they assertives? Are they accommodators? Right, things like that. And do you then have to sort of, from a communication perspective, change your style to sort of counter that or match that, or to effectively work with somebody who's got a particular archetype in play when you're negotiating with them across the table?
Only if you want to be successful.
Okay, so you have to.
So yes, you definitely want to do this. I was doing some work with an oil company a couple days ago, and it was with their leadership team, and we put together a program called personality-based persuasion. How you can start to read other people's personalities and then approach your negotiation more strategically based on the person who's on the other side. And so when you think about the psychology of personality, we don't just need to think about it from the other side. What is their personality trait? What are they like? We have to think about it from ourselves too, because we need to find ways to persuade authentically in a way that's aligned with who we are and what we believe, but slightly tailor the message based on who's on the other side. And so one of the things that we have to consider here when we think about personality is the big five personality traits. So the acronym is OCEAN. We have openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And people are going to be either high or low on all five of those traits. And so when you start to get a better understanding of the psychology of personality, then you can see who's on the other side and then frame your message strategically based on the personality traits of the other person.
Yep, really good advice. Karthika?
Yeah, I think Aisha also brought up a really good point, and that was kind of my next question, right? So, comment, in a life or death situation, right, when somebody is about to attack you or hurt you, do you like sort of negotiate? Do you run like hell, or do you kick them in the nuts?
So I like watching mixed martial arts. I've never been in a fight in my life, but I like to see other people do it. And so and so they often people often ask fighters, "Hey, what would you do if you were in a street fight?" Because they want to know what they would do. And so, to your point, they say, "If I'm in a street fight, I am kicking them in the nuts and I'm running away. Why would I stay and fight?" Right? And so, and so I'm going to do what those professionals would do under that situation. Remember this: negotiation takes time, and if your safety is at risk, then you want to first get to safety. Usually, I'm a diplomacy first kind of guy, but if it's a situation where somebody has clearly declared war, I'm going to adjust my approach.
So
Yeah.
let me, sorry, Laurie, if
Go
you
ahead,
don't mind asking a follow-up question. So I know women face this a lot of like harassment, sexual assault in like offices, even on like Zoom calls and things like that. In those kinds of situations, how do you kind of cultivate compassion, curiosity, or how do you kind of negotiate your way out of it in a manner that it doesn't affect your job, or like you can still get to keep your job, people don't try to get rid of you from the company, and especially if it's someone of influence, right? So how do you deal with those kind of situations? I know I faced it, and I mean, I know there are tons of other women out there who have faced this issue.
Yeah, well, we have to think about this. Let's think about it from the context of a negotiation. In a negotiation, we understand there's going to be a little bit of give and take. Coming into it, after you prepare, you say, okay, I'm going to start the negotiation here. I'm willing to give a little bit here and go back and forth, etc. But in a situation of harassment, there's no negotiating that. There's no saying to the other side, well, I guess you can harass me a little bit, right? That's not a legitimate outcome, right? And so we have to make it clear that there is a line. And so what I want people to do in this type of situation, because I've had to counsel people through this, is when you're addressing the issue, you want to focus specifically on the facts and the impact. So this is what happened, and you want to try to strip all commentary from it, and then say it had this impact on me and what needs to change, right? because it's not a back and forth where we're going to try to negotiate how you feel about this situation. How you feel is how you felt. That's it. And now it's their responsibility to adjust. And then before you have that conversation, if you're talking to the person directly, you have to understand what your alternative is. If behavior doesn't change, what's the next step? It's an if then proposition, not a threat. It's a warning, right? And the difference is pretty significant, because with a warning, you say, this is what I am going to do to you. With a threat, you say, this is what I am going to do to you. With a warning, you're saying, this is what happens if you continue on this path. And so it's not as aggressive. You're giving them a choice, so they feel as though you're not leveraging them, right? But you're still making it abundantly clear where the line in the sand is drawn. And when it comes to harassment or abuse or anything like that, it is your responsibility to draw that line, and it's only you that can determine the appropriate place for that line.
Well said. I mean, I think that your background as a lawyer really helps that answer as well, right? So, well put. So, I have a sort of a interesting question. And it's a lot to do with sort of the what we've seen in the U.S. since the election, or slightly before that, even, right? So, when how can you actually sort of negotiate when the other side is having a whole different sort of set of facts and almost live in a different reality, right? I mean, is that even possible? So, I mean, this is sort of a larger extensional question from the US standpoint, right? Can you negotiate with people, for example, who think, the election was won by somebody else, or who think, these conspiracy theorists and all that? I mean, because it doesn't seem like that side is grounded in any kind of reality. So how do you sort of make that bridge, or can you make that bridge? Can you even negotiate with people who are on another planet altogether in terms of facts?
It's tough. You can, but it's difficult. And I think it really depends on what your goal is in the situation. A lot of times when we're talking about politics, people go in emotionally, but they don't think strategically about what it is that they hope to accomplish out of the conversation, right? In a majority of these situations, we just want to be heard, and the other person wants the same. And so
Right.
if you can create an atmosphere of mutual respect where you can just listen, summarize, reflect your understanding, and go back and forth, then that's definitely doable. That's definitely doable. Now, if you're trying to have a more persuasive conversation where you say, this person is currently right here, this is their stance, I want to move them over here, it's still doable, but it'll take time. And we have to recognize what we're fighting against. There's this myth of rationality in difficult conversations and negotiations. If you're basing your entire persuasive argument on facts, data, logic, science, that alone, that's not good enough. That won't get it done, because we're not rational beings. We are emotional beings that happen to occasionally act rational at times, right? And so we have to recognize what the barrier is. The barrier is going to be emotional. Aligned with this group politically speaking. All right. There's a little bit of tribalism happening. People like me believe this. When we're talking about politics, it's really talking about two issues. It's about identity and morality. What does it mean to be a good or bad person, and who I am as a person? That's why in the US, people don't say I tend to vote Democrat or I tend to vote Republican. They say I am Republican or I am a Democrat, right? And so we're not dealing with facts yet. We're dealing with things that are deeply rooted in our human psychology. And so at the beginning of the conversation, what you have to do is you have to recognize that they're going to be threatened. Their identity of who they are is going to feel threatened, and their identity of what it means to be a good person is going to be threatened. And so we're intuitive, but what you need to do is you need to reaffirm the relationship at the beginning and let them know that you see them as a good person and that you respect what they believe. That's what they're really talking about. The different issues of the day are really proxy wars for morality and identity. And once they feel content in the fact that you see them as a good person, then they're going to be a little bit more flexible on those facts, right? They're going to be a little bit more flexible on those specific positions. But the thing is, that's going to be a barrier. Those emotional things are going to be a barrier until they're acknowledged and addressed. And that's why a lot of these conversations, we start throwing facts at the other side, and then they throw alternative facts towards us. The conversation breaks down because you're like, I cannot, this person's crazy. Not that they're crazy, it's that they're emotionally invested in their perspective. Once you address that emotional stance, then it becomes a lot easier to have a higher level conversation on the substantive issues.
So I think that, I mean, brilliant. So I mean, one thing that I mean, obviously that was a very extreme example, right, of this thing where we have one set of facts, another set of facts. But in day-to-day negotiations that people do, it's this concept that you brought out, this myth of rationality, that does exist, right? So what you're saying first is to build rapport. I mean, connect emotionally before any negotiations, before you start bringing out, here's the benefits of my thing and the prices that I want, and now you share what you want, and we sort of come to an agreement, right? That's not what you're talking about. What you're talking about is essentially build the connection at an emotional level, see them as sort of emotional beings before sort of trying to argue or negotiate on the facts basis. Am I reading that correctly?
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. We have to recognize which battle we're fighting at what time. And one of the biggest challenges that we have in negotiation and persuasion is that we try to persuade too soon. We don't know enough about the situation, we don't know enough about the person, and we haven't addressed the emotional issues before we've gotten to the substantive issues. So it's not that we don't talk about facts, data, logic, and science. It's not that we don't talk about those. Those are very important. We just need to make sure that we're talking about those things at the right time.
So, and if I'm also understanding it correctly, Kwame, just correct me if I'm wrong, it's also important to establish that regardless of our opposing views, we still consider the other person to be a good person, that we don't think that they're morally wrong somehow.
Right. I think here's the thing. I give people the benefit of the doubt. I don't think most people wake up and say, you know what, I'm excited to be evil today. I think a lot of times they wake up and they say, this is how I see the world, and because I see the world this way, it's going to dictate these actions. Beliefs are powerful. Beliefs are powerful because we might say that beliefs exist only in somebody's mind, right? But that's not necessarily true because it's our beliefs that dictate our subsequent actions, right? And so I believe that most people, based on their beliefs, think that they're doing the right thing for themselves and for society. I genuinely believe that. Now, if we adjust that belief, then they can adjust their behavior. But if you attack the person and say you're a bad person, the only answer they have is no, I'm a good person. I have never seen a conversation where somebody's like, you are a bad person, and you're like, you know what? I am evil. You got me, right? That's just it's not it is not a reasonable path to victory in these conversations.
So let me ask a follow-up question, Lavi, if you don't mind.
Please.
So I find that perfectly rational human beings who you have friendly rapport with and everything, when it's political, it becomes completely charged up and really revved up with people practically, fist cuffing against each other. Why does that happen? Why is politics bring out almost like such animalistic instincts in us?
I mean, let's stick with that word, animalistic, right? As when we come down to our base human psychology, we're tribal by nature. And when we think about tribalism, what that means is that there is an irrational preference to people who are like us, people who we consider to be in our tribe. And so then along with that is that there is an animalistic level of aggression towards people who you think are threatening your tribe. And so what ends up happening is once the person feels threatened, when their identity and morality feels threatened, it reaches a heightened level of emotionality because they view it as an existential threat. Right? It's really interesting. The psychology, what happens beneath the surface, they're going to actually process this threat as if it is a threat to their life, their livelihood, because they see it as a threat to who they are. And so other issues, when we talk about money, when we talk about what is the right decision to have at work, yes, your emotions are going to take hold. But usually in those conversations, the issues of morality and identity are not threatened. They're not core and central to the discussion. But when it comes to politics, race, religion, those type of conversations, that's when you get to those core fundamental values. And when people feel as though those are threatened, then they reject it as an existential threat, and they're going to be heightened levels of emotionality and aggression.
Okay. So in the short time we have left, I know you have to rush, Kwame. Can you sort of give our viewers an idea of what you mean by compassionate curiosity? I mean, how would you actually use that as a tool?
Yes. So the compassionate curiosity framework is a framework for having your difficult conversations that is designed to be applicable widely. So you can use it at work, you can use it at home. So I use it with opposing counsel in my legal negotiations. I use it with my wife and my son at home. And so it's really, really powerful. Step one is acknowledge and validate emotions. Step two is get curious with compassion. And then step three is joint problem solving. And so, what it does is that it helps you address the emotional component of the conversation first by acknowledging and validating the emotion. So, you're saying, it sounds like you're feeling a little bit frustrated, or it seems like this is really important to you. Just sticking to that framework of it sounds like or it seems like, and then just saying it makes sense. After they explain themselves, it makes sense that you feel this way. You're giving them an opportunity to decompress. And usually, if you do this cycle for a little bit of time during the conversation, depending on the level of emotion.
Hello?
Did we lose Kwame there?
Uh, yeah, no, he's back.
No, he's back. Go ahead. Depending on the.
I
So-
think he's here. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Fine.
Now we can hear you? Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what you do is you acknowledge and validate those emotions. So you let them know that, hey, I see you. It sounds like you're feeling frustrated. It seems like this had an impact on you, right? And then you do that until the person starts to calm down. Then you get curious with compassion, asking open-ended questions with a compassionate tone to make sure that they don't see you as a threat, and then get emotional again. So then you're gathering that information so you can get a better understanding of them. So this is the empathy part of it. And then joint problem solving, what you're doing is you're inviting them into the problem solving process. Win-win negotiations, trading proposals, trying to figure out what makes it work.
Yeah. So this whole concept of zero sum, one person winning and the other person losing, that's not a negotiation tactic that you advocate. I think a lot of people have moved past that sort of old school game theory sort of thinking where there has to be one winner, right? So the right way to negotiate is to create a mutual win-win. Because I'm assuming that once you negotiate, you have to sort of keep doing something together with that person. You're not walking away.
Exactly. And that's the thing. In the vast majority of situations, this is going to be the case. There are going to be some true zero sum games where, let's say, it's like haggling for a used car, right?
Right.
Okay. That's zero sum. I'm not going to, hang out with the person who sold me my car.
Right.
But in the vast majority of these other interactions, you're right. It's win-win. We have to consider the relationship going forward, because if I just dominate people in my deals, there's this psychological concept, maybe you've heard of it, called revenge. they're gonna come back for me. I can't risk that.
Just one last question, comment before we let you go. So are these negotiation tactics gender neutral? Do they apply to women and men equally? And sort of how can women assert themselves and hold their general ground in negotiations without being seen or labeled as being pushy, aggressive, especially when dealing with men who consider themselves to be superior and kind of need to be in charge all the time?
So that's the last question. You're giving me like this much time. Man. Okay, so let's start off with this. I want to give people a resource. We have a second podcast with the American Negotiation Institute called Ask with Confidence. And so it's all about women in negotiation. Really, really great show. And they explore that deeply on it. Our chief operating officer, Catherine Kanapke, hosts that show. And so some of the things we have to recognize first is the reality that bias is real. The reality that if a man says something one way, it can be labeled as a good leader. And then a woman says something the exact same way, and she could be labeled as something negative, right? And so we have to recognize that. When I look at some of the researchers who have dug deeply into this issue and figured out what can be done and what should be done, I think first of Linda Babcock and Sarah Lashver. They're the authors of the book Women Don't Ask and Ask for It. Two really great books that explore the topic of gender dynamics in negotiation. And what they found is that when it comes to women advocating for themselves in negotiations, they're often penalized inappropriately for their assertiveness. But at the same time, the challenge is the only way you can be successful in your negotiations is if you are, in fact, assertive. And so what they said is that in their experiments, they found that if women still stay assertive, but frame their request in a more collaborative way, it's received a lot better, right? And so it's not like I'm asking for this salary increase and this title change for me. It's that I'm asking for this salary change and title, title change and salary increase because this is what's best for the company, and here's why. We have these holes in our operations. I've identified those holes, and I'm the best person to do it, and I'll be able to lead the team in a way that promotes the company. This is the best thing for us, right? And it's a slight semantic shift, but it allows you to still assert yourself and advocate for yourself, but you start to avoid that social penalty by framing it in a more collaborative way.
Very, very good advice. Thank you, Kwame. I know that inclement weather shortened our conversation with you today because of the snowstorm, but we are glad and happy that you made it. Thank you so much for sharing all your invaluable sort of resources for our listeners as well. Thank you so much. It has been interesting, short, but very interesting, insightful conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kwame.
Thank you, my
Thank
friends.
Thank
Stay
Appreciate
warm.
you so much.
I'll try my best.
You too. Take care. Bye.